Budget 2018. What does young India expect?
Forget the big bang reforms, just make sure implementation is going through.
I would want the finance minister to continue to be very aggressive in his outlook.
Times Now News reached IIM Ahmedabad to know the voices of the future leaders. The students openly shared their suggestions and expectations from the Union Budget 2018. They also spoke about increasing investment limits, corporate tax restructuring, and investing more in the rural economy. Can India become a $5 trillion economy by 2025? Here is what the students had to say.
Overall, on the macroeconomic front, I would like to say that India is performing quite well. On a micro level, taking into account that the various reforms which has been ushered in by the government, be it GST, demonetization, RERA, housing for all, IBC, all of these factors indicate that we are moving in a very good direction. One thing that needs to be done is better implementation, no doubt. I think I have three broader themes in mind. One is the fiscal consolidation path. Already we are having hue and cries over the fiscal deficit percentage, and that the government might just cross it over. Right, so number one, moving towards a path of fiscal consolidation is one. Number two, I think infrastructure needs to be given a much major thrust. Taking into account that we are a developing nation, we have more than 50% of our population below 35. So I think in a growing economy, infrastructure, roadways, highways, hospitals, buildings, so all of these things are something which the government needs to focus more upon.
I would also like the finance minister to look at agriculture and the rural sector. So if you look at the previous union budget, you had a lot of schemes, a lot of provisions for both farmers and the rural sector in terms of 100% electrification target by May 2018, which is definitely unachievable. You had a lot of funds for irrigation, dedicated micro irrigation set up by NABARD. You had crop insurance scheme for the fasal in the terms of Fasal Bima Yojana, but none of that has materialized. And if you look at the farm production, that has increased, the yield rates have increased, but the farmer income has not grown. So if from 2014 to 2017, the farmer's income grew by a meager 0.7% per year. And the reason for that is the falling agricultural prices, not just across the country, but also across the globe. And the government needs to provide better remuneration to the farmers. It also needs to reduce the glut in the market through some import and export policies. It recently announced a policy to bring the domestic prices, the MSP, in alignment for pulses and oilseeds at par with the world.
I think generally if you see the debates around the budget, we rate the government very positively on the reforms and the policies that they come up with. But if you're evaluating any policy, you have to look at the implementation. Forget the big bang reforms, just make sure implementation is going through, especially with infrastructure projects, smart cities. We don't know how much has actually gone through into reality. Sagarmala, Bharatmala, these infrastructure projects have been announced, but how much of that translates because of the permissions and regulations that come into the picture. So we need to focus more on that than just looking at the allocation of funds per se.
On the corporate taxation, one thing which can be looked at is that maybe up to a certain threshold of revenues or profits, a certain lower tax rate can be given, and at the same time there would be no deductions at all. So the whole structure is simplified in a way.
It would be very interesting to see how the government goes about augmenting its revenue. I think there will be a lot of pressures on the expenditure side. As for the revenue side, in order to maintain that 3.2% target, the various steps that the government takes, whether we might foresee possibly change in stance as far as the long-term capital gains tax on sale of shares is concerned, or possibly maybe reduction in corporate tax rate has been something that's been spoken about since the past couple of budgets, but I don't foresee that coming considering the fact that there's so much pressure on the expenditure side. At this point of time, we are straddled with a very archaic tax structure which dates back to 1961, and the tax structure is extremely complex, and that becomes extremely difficult for MSMEs to flourish in the country because often they require the help of a lot of professionals in dealing with the intricacies of the tax system. So I would probably look at a separate tax structure, an altogether separate tax structure for maybe MSME enterprises, probably something on the lines of what we may expect in the direct tax code that's there in the pipeline, or maybe a simplified tax mechanism.
Currently, if you look at the tax slabs, I think tax compliance is a major issue, and not and how the adherence can be increased is either you reduce the tax rates for the higher brackets, so you make sure that the 10 lakh amount at which 30% corporate tax rate is charged goes higher, maybe 15, maybe 20, 25. That can be done. Or you increase the tax exemption limit. So you currently have no taxes below 2.5, right? So you can increase that to 3.5, 3. That's something that can be done.
When we talk about a populist budget, on the one hand, you know that expenditures have to be high, but there's no reason for them to cut their revenue source by cutting direct income tax rates. So we could hope for that later, but I mean, in after this budget, but definitely not in this one.
Regarding personal taxation, I agree with what everyone's views are here, that I don't expect a very significant change or a radical change in the structure. But there could be small tweaks done. Say, for example, medical reimbursement, one of those deductions. The exemption limit currently is 15,000, and I see that to be something which is really unrealistic, and I think that that limit should be increased by a certain amount to reflect the current expenses that you actually incur in today's date. So that would be one of it. The second could be that there was a survey done which showed that most Indians prefer to keep money in fixed deposits as a safe destination for funds. So currently we have a deduction for savings account interest that we earn. So maybe you could extend that to So maybe you could extend that to fixed deposit so that a lot of people could be benefited. I agree the tax, the revenues would go down there, but then maybe you could have a certain limit saying that this is the amount up to which you could have interest on fixed deposits exempt. So maybe small reforms like these could be something which the government might look to do at this point of time, in my opinion.
There are 3 or 4 major schemes through which MHRD functions, like ICDS, midday meal, and National Rural Health Mission for children. So those allocations are not at par with the actual demand. So states have been asking for money, but since we don't have any allocation, we are not able to provide them the money. So that means schools have been there, the facility for kitchen has been there for preparing midday meals, but the allocation has been reduced. The food is not getting cooked there. So we know how much money needs to be spent on these schemes, because those estimates have already been provided by the respective ministries to the finance minister. It's now in the hand of finance minister rather than approve those estimates or allocate money according to the continuing trend.
If you look at the overall economy, and if you look at even China, it has had a very high percentage of GDP spending on infrastructure building, and it has been for over 3 decades, which has been able to help to sustain high growth for the economy. So which also needs to be done for India. So as a percentage of GDP, you need to increase your spending on infrastructure, and the main problem with that is that it gives it benefits in the long term, and it's not immediate. So it's kind of a hard pill to take, that it's like taking a hard step. Okay, I'll spend this money on infra, which will give its benefit in the long term. But I think so, to sustain high growth over a period of time, over decades, it is a necessary step which needs to be taken.
I would want the finance minister to be extremely brave and continue to be very aggressive in his outlook and focus on structural measures, irrespective of maybe when the benefits reap on.
One takeaway that you can get from IIM Ahmedabad is to increase the investment in infrastructure. For example, building linkages between the rural economy and the urban economy through roadways, cold storages. All of those are really essential steps. If we bring the farmer closer to his or her markets, so that they can sell their wares directly rather than having a middleman in between, right? And encouraging them, providing better irrigation facilities, seeds, fertilizers, soil quality, bringing in top-notch research in the agriculture field itself, all of that is really going to push everything in a positive way. So I think rather than going for farm loan waivers or setting higher MSPs, it makes more sense to invest in the structural changes which are going to take care of the rest of the impacts by themselves.
I think one key takeaway from what all we feel is that the government is definitely looking from a long-term perspective. There have been a lot of recent changes such as GST and other new laws that have come in, and we feel that it's important that we do not introduce many new structural reforms at this particular point of time, and maybe continue with whatever good initiatives that have been started and focus on the implementation part of it, and ensure that what has been started achieves its objectives. So I think that should be the main focus, And even last year's budget had a good number of initiatives that have been started off, and I think emphasis can be placed on continuing them rather than only focusing on new initiatives.
The students seem to be of the opinion that the three important areas which need more focus are rural, education and infrastructure. Let's see if the Union Budget 2018 turns out to be what the young India wants. For more updates on budget, visit timesnownews.com.